All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat.
And I'm Eric.
And I'm Stan.
And today we are going to be contemplating the Dreamcast Mini because Sega has been hinting about their next mini console, which, as you can imagine, will likely be a Dreamcast Mini. So we're going to talk about some of the RPGs that might appear on the Mini, and we've narrowed it down to 5 possible candidates. We will expand beyond that, but we're going to focus mainly on 5 RPGs here, and it should be a pretty good discussion. And then after that, we're going to do a Nintendo 3DS DS challenge. We've already did the challenge, but effectively we're trying to find cheap 3DS and DS RPGs. So each one of us went online to scour the internet and find an under $20 deal for a great RPG, and we're going to talk about what we found and then decide who found the best deal. Then we have a question from Berserker Barrage, who says, for any RPGs you ultimately didn't finish, is there a reason or factors that typically cause you to drop off and not return? Let's go ahead and jump into our very first topic. Like I said before, Dreamcast Mini, this is something that Sega's been hinting at. Specifically, in a recent interview with Famitsu Magazine, the Sega creative producer Yosuke Okanari, is that how you pronounce it? Does that sound right?
Sure.
We got consensus on this? All right, we're going with it.
Close enough. Yeah.
That's the official Phoenix Edge pronunciation. So this gentleman said that a Dreamcast Mini could be the next mini console to be released by Sega. Specifically, it said, I think for the next one, we may go with a concept close to the Mega Drive Mini. If I have to say some names, it could be an SG-1000 Mini or a Dreamcast Mini. Now, most sane people have walked away thinking that Sega's going to be doing a Dreamcast Mini, and here's why. Real quickly, if you're not familiar with the SG-1000, that's reason one why it's probably not going to be an SG-1000, because you're probably not familiar with it. But it was Sega's first console. It had a very limited release in 1983, and it was mostly released in Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, and it didn't sell very well, primarily because Sega insisted on having only first-party games. They wouldn't let third-party games come onto it. So it only had like 73 games. It was limited release, and it just didn't sell very well. And on top of that, people have pointed out that if they're going to go back to that era, they would more than likely do the Master System as opposed to the SG-1000, because the Master System can play all SG-1000 games. So if there's a special game or two on SG-1000, they would probably do the Master System and maybe have one of those games on there as a novelty item, because the Master System was much more powerful, much more popular and powerful, and was released worldwide. Had games like Phantasy Star on there, for example.
Yeah, pretty much no one has nostalgia for that.
Unless you lived in New
console.
Zealand.
And 2, you can find those games on any cheap knockoff console or like game collection thing that you plug into your TV. You know, those cheap plastic things you find.
Yeah.
Guarantee you most of those games are on there.
Yeah.
Like I said, no one has nostalgic value for it. You never hear people talk about it or be fond of it like the Atari systems or any other system around the time. So it's bad business unless there's any specific country that it's sold really well in. There's not much value in it. The Dreamcast Mini, like you said, is the only real logical choice between the two.
Yeah, for sure. And so that's basically where we're at. I would be shocked if it was an SG-1000, but you know, anyways. So we're going with the consensus here with it, which is across the board that this is going to be a Dreamcast Mini. And so we took 5 RPGs with the highest rated scores as criteria for possible Dreamcast Mini candidates. And we're going to discuss whether they could be a contender for the mini console, pros and cons, that type of thing, and also discuss the games specifically. We tried to exclude games that were primarily online, or most of the content, or 3/4 of the content was online. So unfortunately, Phantasy Star Online, not going to be there probably. I would be surprised, but we're just going to assume that it's not going to be an online console here. Let's jump into it here. So our first game here is Skies of Arcadia. I think this is a no-brainer RPG. I think when most people think
Given.
RPG Dreamcast, Skies of Arcadia, but it received an average review from what we saw of around 91. RPGfan.com actually reviewed it 5 times on the Dreamcast. I was surprised by 5 different reviewers, and they all gave it scores between 91 to 94. Just a little bit of info on the game. The game takes place in a fictional skies of Arcadia, where 6 civilizations coexist on floating continents. The game is a turn-based RPG with an emphasis on world exploration, and it's often compared to the early 3D Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest games. Some of the history or legacy behind the game: Skies of Arcadia is the 6th largest rated Dreamcast game on Metacritic and a top 5 RPG release for the year 2000, along with Final Fantasy IX and Chrono Cross, Baldur's Gate 2, and Vagrant Story. So definitely did well on that front. And despite its critical acclaim, neither the Dreamcast or GameCube version sold very well. It's also not available digitally on PC or any modern console, and it's kind of baffling for that reason. According to pricecharting.com, which is a website that it's the average price it would cost to buy the game today, because this would be appeal of playing this game on a mini console. Right now, it's going for about $100 on Dreamcast. The GameCube version is actually going for $130. So I think that having this game on a mini console would be really appealing to a lot of people. So what do you guys think about this game coming to the Dreamcast Mini?
Oh, I think it's a given. First off, Sega owns it. So if they needed an RPG to be on that Mini, that is the perfect choice. It's their highest rated RPG. It would be, I think that game alone could be a huge system seller for a lot of people who would be contemplating getting it. Like, I think that would sell RPG players, that game alone.
Yeah, if I could play, I totally agree with you. First off, I think that if Skies of Arcadia was not on the Dreamcast Mini, I think that people would be rioting in the streets. And I'm being a little exaggerated here, but I don't think people would buy it. However,
they'd be rioting furiously, typing the keys on their in their chat rooms and Discord servers, right?
Multiple people typing on Discord.
Several people are typing will happen.
Yeah. What I find baffling about Sega is that they've never re-released this game, and they've always shown some resistance to the idea of remastering it for whatever reason. And I think that by putting it on a Dreamcast Mini like this, it would be a very easy way for them to get the fans off their back about the ones that are clamoring for this game to be redone. You know, who knows what the problem might be. They may not want to spend the time remastering it, optimizing it, then spending $30 million on marketing and getting the developers back in a room to do a little fluff piece about it, and you know, then have to put a physical version on multiple consoles. Or I think it would be worth it, but for whatever reason, they haven't wanted to do that. So putting on a Dreamcast Mini, all they'd have to do is run it on an emulator. And if people are like, well, you didn't optimize it, they'd be like, well, it's the Dreamcast version, you know? And so they wouldn't have to market it, like put a bunch of money in the marketing or anything. It would just be on the Dreamcast Mini. There you go. You can play it.
I guess maybe the nature of it being 2 discs might be hard for it to HD remaster. I don't know if the Sega Dreamcast had any complicated programming, or the GameCube for that matter. I know an issue with bringing Twin Snakes, Metal Gear Solid, to HD is a lot of complications having it on 2 discs instead of 1. You kind of have to either combine the game together, both discs, or you have to like emulate it, like you said, and it just switched to disc 2 through emulation. So getting an HD version of Skies of Arcadia may be difficult for that reason, because both the Dreamcast and the GameCube version are 2 disc games. So it could be complicated there. But I mean, like I said, it's a beautiful opportunity to get it on the Dreamcast emulated mini device at least. And if they do like an HD remaster, like you said, it might actually be a good idea to do a full-on remake from the ground up for that game. Use it, the Valkyria Chronicles.
But for a Dreamcast Mini, though, they wouldn't. You don't think they would just? We're not going to give you the Dreamcast version. We're going to remake it.
No, certainly not. They'll give you the original Dreamcast version, not
Yeah.
even the GameCube version.
It's one of those things where we're just kind of like grasping at straws of why they haven't done it because it's such an excellent idea. But what do you all think about the game? We're not going to be able to get like super in depth here, but what do you guys have some thoughts about Skies of Arcadia?
Well, this one is one of my blind spots. Like, I've only played this game for a couple hours, and it was a long time ago. I've been meaning to get back into it, but I mean, there's no excuse. I could have emulated it a long time ago if I really made it a priority. But yeah, I'd never had it for GameCube, and I never owned a Dreamcast. I borrowed one, and that's how I played it for a little bit. But yeah, this is one of the great ones that I have just.
Missed.
It's a blind spot for me. I haven't gotten into it. Yeah.
I am with you. I could have emulated it and I've thought about it many, many times because I know it's a good game and I want to play good games. However, every time I think about emulating it, I think, they got to be remastering this thing at some point. You know, it's like, it's got to be coming to the Switch. It's like, because it's just one of those things where you're like, why have you not done this?
Because it's so highly acclaimed. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, dude, who gives a crap? Just remaster it. So that's basically what I thought.
I will say though, you definitely want the GameCube version or the Dreamcast. As much as I love the Dreamcast title, one of the biggest flaws to the game is its horrendous amount of random encounters. GameCube actually eased up the random encounter, and the game is a little easier, not so easy that it's not challenging, but they balanced it a lot better, and graphically it does look a little better. But again, if a Dreamcast Mini is a thing, it's definitely going to be the Dreamcast version. So take that with a grain of salt if you're more of a fan of the GameCube one.
Yeah, it would be crazy not to have that on the Dreamcast Mini for sure. Let's go on to our second game here. So we have Grandia 2. So this game had an average score of around 89. RPG Fan reviewed it 4 times on the Dreamcast. Reviews ranged from 87 to 94. So the game has a unique battle system that is turn-based with real-time elements. The game allows limited character movement during battle and a system to cancel enemy moves with the right timing. The Dreamcast release was widely praised, with most gaming magazines and websites scoring at 80% or higher, with many of them close to 90%. The game was ported to PC and PS2 in 2002, but reviewed worse than the Dreamcast version due to technical issues like frame rate, textures, and gameplay glitches. I can also confirm that when I look at reviews, the PS2 version reviews substantially worse. But anyways, so that's some background with it. Pricecharting.com, you can get it for Dreamcast for $100. The PS2 version's $20, or it's just been remastered for the PC and Switch.
Man, I already got $200 worth from the 2 games you mentioned alone. I think I can retire with this guy behind me.
Yeah, that's probably. Speaking of Grandia 2 and the Dreamcast Mini, it seems a little weird that Grandia 2 has just come out on Steam and it's just come out elsewhere. There's that remastered version that costs like $40. It just seems weird they would stick all these games on this console for presumably an affordable price that would, if the console's $120 and there's 20 games on it, that's a lot of money they're leaving on the table by not basically allowing people to buy the Dreamcast Mini at a discounted price for these games as opposed to buying the Switch or PC version.
Yeah, if for some reason it doesn't make it on there, it'll be because they just released it last year on Steam and Switch, right? And they want you to buy that instead. So, like, Skies of Arcadia seems more like a slam dunk because you can't purchase it anywhere else, right? So there's money to be made by putting it on the mini console and then using that as a selling point. But Grandia 2, while it's the Dreamcast version is a very good game, and the other version still a good game but has problems. They're selling it on Steam and Switch, so it's kind of like I could see why they wouldn't want to double dip on it necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, my sentiments exactly. They would have to get licensing on top of that. and I feel like it would not be in their interest, especially since they're a smaller company that was handling the HD remasters, and I don't think they would want to
Oh,
do
right.
anything to stray away from uh, getting more sales on their end. This is a very
Mhm.
recent release too. Yeah, if it was never released already, I would say it was a good shot. But I think under the particular circumstances, I don't think it's going to be on there if the Dreamcast Mini.
Yeah, that's kind of where my hesitation is. I'm a little bit more optimistic, but I do want to point out that, Final Fantasy VII Remaster was out and they still put that on the PS Classic. Although I think that Final Fantasy VII was so synonymous with the PlayStation that it was just like, that has to be on there. Like it cannot be on there. And they
Yeah.
didn't put the remastered version. They just put the PlayStation version on there. And again, I think that was just such a big game that they couldn't avoid it. Whereas with Grandia 2, it's a bit of a mixed bag where there's a lot of interest in it, but there's not a lot of people have not played it. And I think that they might choose to just buy the game on Steam as opposed to just buying a $120 console or however much it's going to be. So I guess it comes down to, the how many games they're going to have on the console probably, and just, what can they get for licensing. If you see Skies of Arcadia and then Grandia 2 released and like a slow draw out of the games, right? Where they just maybe release one game every week or something. If the first two games are Skies of Arcadia and Grandia 2, get ready for some real clunkers after that. Because they're going to pad that thing out like it's cool.
Right.
But so, anyways, Grandia 2, guys, I gotta be honest. I played it on the Switch recently, and my God, I really like that game. Mainly because, like, the main character, he was basically just a dick. He wasn't your typical, what I thought being like this main hero that's always gonna save the last in distress, right? He doesn't care. He's just in it for the money, and he's like, I like the fact that he was a kind of a reversal of that typical JRPG hero. And then there was so much world building in the game also that I really, really liked, that was brought in a way where it was just through character dialogue that felt natural. And it really helped to kind of suck me in with hearing these conversations between these characters, and just kind of how the world works, and just, the way society operates in this world. It was just very, very interesting. Not to mention the battle system is really cool too. It's kind of got that Tales verse, but more turn based vibe going with it. And I really, really liked it. I think it's easily like close to a PlayStation Final Fantasy era RPG for me personally. I thought it was that good. But
Yeah, it's a really, I mean, it's a really good game. There are a little bit of outdated aspects like the graphics and things obviously being
voice
a dream.
acting, yeah.
I mean, even the voice acting's okay. It's a product of its time on that too. What I really do like about, like you said, the story, I like that there's a lot of nuance of what's good and evil. And I like how it explores that. It's like things that you initially think the way they are. You get some of those stories like that today, but you didn't get stories like that too many times back then during the golden era of RPGs. So even right now, I recommend getting it on the Switch and playing it. You get both the first game and the second game, and
It's a
like
steal.
I said, it's really good.
Yeah.
The combat system is pretty stellar. On top of that, I like tactically timing things to cancel out other enemies. It's a little harder on bosses. I'm not a big fan of the boss battles in the game.
Dude, the boss battles can be ridiculous. Even like early boss battles. I remember one where my characters had like 450 HP and the boss would do like 200 damage, like in a regular
Yeah,
attack.
and
Just
then the
like, this
boss
is
would have
freaking
the boss would have
ridiculous.
multi parts to it, along with other enemies coming out and helping. And I'm like, oh my god. So I'm like, screw it, go straight for the core
Yeah.
and just do that and just try to survive whatever hits you.
Yeah.
Like have someone on full time healing because I was like, I am not going through each and every one of these little things.
Yeah. But I really love when I use like special moves and it'll fade to like a anime hand drawn FMV type thing, right? It's really cool how that was incorporated into it. And it just I don't know, it just adds a lot of unique flair to it that makes it stand out in my eyes. So let's move on, shall we? For our third game, we have Shenmue 2. Now, we had to kind of decide between Shenmue 1 or 2 just because both of those games were ranking very high. And we ended up going with Shenmue 2 because that one was ranked a little bit higher than Shenmue 1, but it received an average review score of 90. And RPGFan.com gave it an 82, and this is from 2001. So a little bit lower than the average, but still very favorable. So Shenmue 2 features an open world environment. It's interspread with brawler battles and quick time events. It features a day and night system, variable weather effects, non-player characters with daily schedules, and various minigames. The player controls teenage martial artist. How do you say his name, Eric?
Rio.
How was his last name? Okay, there we go. As he arrives in Hong Kong in 1987 in pursuit of his father's killer. So it's got very story-based, very open environment, right? And the game is recognized for improving on most aspects of the original game, with one journalist from Eurogamer claiming it took the console to the very brink of its capabilities. Shenmue 2 was voted the 10th best game of all time by IGN readers back in 2008, about 7 years after its release. So that's telling, right? Both Shenmue 1 and 2 are recognized now as the pioneers of the quick time event, which would later be used in Resident Evil, God of War, and Tomb Raider games, among many others. One note, Shenmue 1 and 2 were re-released together for the PS4 and Xbox One in 2018, and it's currently around $20 to $35 if you want to get that. The remaster has a 75 on Metacritic from critics, but an 84 from users. A little, what's the word I'm looking for?
Divisive or
divisive, yes. It's a little divisive between newer and older players, but the most common issue cited is the not enough was done to modernize or tweak some of the outdated gameplay mechanics. But if you wanted to go with the retro version, Shenmue 2 is going for about $55 on Dreamcast right now. If you want the Xbox version, it's $10.
Shenmue 1 would be on there before 2.
Even though Shenmue 2 is rated higher?
Yes, because Shenmue 2 is a direct continuation of 1.
Boom,
So
there you go.
you're giving a game that's a direct sequel. You don't have the prior game to it. Now, it's very possible they could put both games on it because they do own both of them. So they could be like, here's Shenmue 1 and 2. I think shouldn't, but I think due to the nature of having an HD collection already, they may not put both. I think they would put the first Shenmue game in there at least, and let that.
That way, new players can play that version if they like it. They can go buy the sequel. That makes sense.
Yeah. Or they could just put both. But if I had to pick one or the other, I'd say the first game.
That's interesting to point that out. I think that right now, if Sega were to at least have the games that we've mentioned thus far, this would be like a fantastic mini console. If it had Skies of Arcadia, Grandia 2, and Shenmue on there, that would be amazing.
I feel like Shenmue though is one of those games that like it is more widely known among like the general gaming population, right? Not just like limited to its genre, because of the quick time events and like how those were not seen as like negative back then, you know, and just how it was kind of the precursor to open world gameplay. Like players had never seen kind of stuff of that quality, I guess you could say, in a 3D environment before.
Yeah.
So
I would say most importantly, Shenmue is a strong representation of the Dreamcast history.
yeah.
It made a large impact to the console like Sonic Adventure did.
Yeah.
Or Power Stone.
Yeah, when I think of the Dreamcast, I think of a game like Shenmue or Sonic Adventure or one that I remember was like a Crazy Taxi. I don't know if you remember that game.
That's the game that comes to mind is Crazy Taxi.
Crazy
Yeah,
Taxi, 100% guaranteed would be.
Yeah,
And
like
no one
you
will
gotta
play
have
it.
those. Yeah, you gotta have those games that people remember the console for on the mini console, and I think Shenmue is definitely one of those games.
I guess since
Grandia 2 less so, probably because like the PS2 version and the PC version came out and more people got to play those versions, even though they weren't as polished, they weren't as good. But Shenmue is like kind of a Dreamcast staple.
I guess it just depends on who their target audience is, right? If it's for hardcore Dreamcast, like people that owned a Dreamcast when they were a kid, well then yeah, Shenmue's going to be on there because that is a nostalgic item associated with the Dreamcast. But if it's going for like new audiences for some reason, which I think now that I'm thinking about it more would be weird, but if they're going for new people, that would be kind of more up in the air for me personally, because they have already re-released those games. So if you are interested in it, would you not just go buy it on Steam or somewhere else? But I mean, these items are made, these mini consoles are made for the fans, right? They're not trying to like Dreamcast 2, right? They're not gonna launch a new Dreamcast console next year that's gonna be modern, and this is like a precursor to it. They're not trying to expand their tent here. They're just trying to, capitalize on the fans that are there. So I think you guys are kind of shifting my opinion on this. I think it makes a lot of sense. Eric, what did you think about Shenmue? Well, we've already talked about the QuickTime events and stuff like that, but is there anything else you want to add on that?
It is most certainly a product of its time. I love the game. It is a very flawed game, but it is a great game. I think it is an important game in a lot of aspects. It did help. I wouldn't say perfected it, but I'd say it was one of the games that helped bridge open world adventure type games. It kind of also showed that, like, I don't know the best way to put it, like a good like open world like human simulator. I don't know the best way to put it, but it did accomplish a lot for its time. But again, I think it was a product that was way ahead of its time, and today it's one that's very outdated. So it's in an interesting position. I think if anyone plays this game, I think they just absolutely need to know what they're getting into
Right.
before experiencing it. It is a piece of history, but it is, like I said, outdated in many aspects.
Yeah, it's like playing I was going to say it's like playing an RPG from the late 80s or something, like, yeah, but it's more modern than that, but just important part of history. But people have taken the revolutionary aspects of that game and they've expanded upon it in better ways since then. That's the biggest reason why I haven't just dove headfirst into this series, though, because it's very appealing to me because it's so popular, but also whenever I see people talk about it that are jumping into it fresh, they just say like, you had to play it when it came out because I just can't get into this now.
Yeah.
Like,
I'll better put it this way. Yakuza series is a spiritual successor to Shenmue in many ways. So if you're a big Yakuza fan and you're interested in where it's not the same game, obviously, but some influence was taken from Shenmue when creating at least the first two Yakuza games.
yeah.
So if you want a little history lesson, there you go. But like I said, you just absolutely need to know what you need to get into. If you want a game like Shenmue that heavily surpasses it, the Yakuza series is what you're looking for.
Yeah. So our next game, this is where we're getting a little, you can start inserting different games in there because there's after those three games, the RPGs are all kind of like neck to neck and you're going to have a difference of opinion wherever you go. But the next game we have is Record of Lodoss War. Now, this game has had mixed opinions, but the people that like it really liked it. It had an average score of 80. However, on RPGFan.com, they gave it an 89. So it's got its fans and it's got its detractors, but it's a 3D RPG with an overhead isometric view, similar to Diablo 2 or Warcraft 2. The story has the player take on the role of a hero who has been resurrected by the wizard Wart to defeat Cardis, the dark goddess of destruction. So the legacy behind this game is that Record of Lodoss War for Dreamcast uses the same setting as the fantasy novels that were released in Japan by author Ryu Mizuno. The novels were actually based on transcripts from a Dungeons and Dragons session the author had made in the 80s that apparently sold really well. So he said, why don't I make this into a book series? Because people really enjoyed the series. And so he did that. And that sold really well. And it was later adapted into an anime also. So
oh no, I was just going to say a lot of people have recommended me the anime. Like,
yeah,
I still haven't seen it.
I've seen it. It's a classic anime.
What does that mean?
Like, yeah, well, I mean, it's like you look at it 1 second and you can tell it has like the older like 80s / early 90s like art style to it. Everything hand drawn, like very sharp images.
So it's good.
It is good. I recommend the Japanese audio because back at that time,
it's
English,
a classic anime.
Yes, it's a classic anime. So I recommend the Japanese audio. But it is very much like a
bad English dub. What's going on?
Yeah.
But it is very much like a Dungeons and Dragons vibe to it. Like you've got like your warrior and your mage and your healer, and yeah, like the characters are just straight up D&D characters pretty much. So it's a good time.
Well, they made a series of games based on that. And, you know, despite it being a well-known IP in Japan and the novel selling over 10 million copies in Japan, which is crazy, the record of Lodoss War for Dreamcast was the only video game out of the 7 games that were ever made that was released outside of Japan until Deedlit and Wonder Labyrinth was released for PC in 2019. Obviously, I've never played that game. So there's that new game there as well. One key point to bring up also is there was an unofficial fan translation that was released semi-recently for the Super Nintendo game called Record of Lodoss War that apparently is highly praised. It's supposed to be a really good RPG. But this game is a little different because it's a Japanese RPG, but it's made in the Western style. But a lot of people really like it. If you want to pick it up on Dreamcast right now on pricecharting.com, it is $45. So that's a fair amount of money.
It looks very much like a like I look at it and I just think of Diablo 2. Like it looks very much like a dungeon crawler. Like it even has the same kind of camera angle view to it.
Yeah.
I can't speak to the quality because I haven't played it, but it is well received by the people who enjoy it. So if you're into that kind of a game and it ends up on a Dreamcast Mini, you know, might be worth a purchase, you know.
So what I've seen is like when people talk about this, they say that it's like a great alternative to Diablo, but the most common thing I've ever heard about this game, like across the board, I think like I've never met somebody that has never brought this, they've always brought this up, is that it has the loudest boot walking on concrete sound of any game.
Really?
It is fairly well known for that. And everyone I've seen has recommended that you immediately go and purchase new footwear so that you do not have that sound effect, because apparently it's just egregious. So if it showed up on the Dreamcast Mini, I think I would want to check it out for that reason alone. But so our next game here is a bit of an oddball, but we wanted to get a little bit kind of wacky with this because usually these consoles will have kind of an obscure game that not a lot of people have played. It might be kind of cool if they had elemental gimmick gear, or egg as it's sometimes called. And this RPG was not well received when it came out, but since its release has actually gained some fans and some kind of a cult following, because at the time of its release, it had hand-drawn graphics in a more pixel art 2D style that you saw with more retro RPGs. But at that time, people were really obsessed with 3D graphics. So it just got slammed with reviews because it was, you know, not looking next gen essentially. But it's an action adventure RPG. And like I said, it uses 2D hand art drawings, and it's got, you know, explorations of dungeons, and it switches to 3D graphics during boss battles. So that's pretty cool. But the player explores ruins that contain puzzles needing to be solved to move forward. exploration and progression has been compared to 2D Zelda titles and Sega's Oasis series. So, I mean, it's an obscure RPG. If you want to pick it up right now on Amazon, or excuse me, pricecharting.com has it at $85. So that would probably be on eBay. So it's pretty pricey, but this is one of those games that I think would be really trendy if it were to release today, you know, with the amount of indie games that we get. And it kind of like has that 2D hand-drawn style, kind of like Cuphead a little bit, but a little bit different. I think that it could actually find a new life if it were re-released, and it would probably not be that hard to license given the fact that it came out on the Dreamcast and then it's never been re-released ever. So it's not like they can make money on it currently. It doesn't have enough of a following, you know, for it to probably warrant a remaster, unfortunately. So having something kind of obscure like this kind of gets people curious about the console, because they can't just pack it with, you know, 10 out of 10 games on the entire console. They have to, you know, they might only be able to afford to do that for like 7 games. So then the other 3 games have to be more obscure titles. So what do you guys think about this game coming to the Mini?
I mean, I've never really heard of it or played it, so I don't really have any real strong opinion.
Would you be surprised if something obscure like this showed up, though?
I think it would, because I think for the price they would probably charge you for it. I don't know if they will just play it safe and put games that people for a fact played on the Dreamcast on there.
Let me play some devil's advocate with you, though. PS Classic, they put Mr. Driller on there.
Yeah, they had some oddballs.
Because they wanted to hit that 20 games or whatever, 25 games. And they probably could only afford to put like Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy VII, Resident Evil. After a while, it's just like, okay, we can only afford to put this many games on there that people know. We need to pad it out to a marketable number, like a 5-figure, you know? So then
I suppose that's a fair point. I think if you need a game to be a filler, I think it's fine on that regard. I think something like Choo Choo Rocket would that criteria a lot more than the full-on RPG, but
yeah.
But you know, who knows?
Anyways, I checked out the soundtrack to this game. It's ballin'. You guys should go check it out. It's got this. It's got this like jazz fusion style going on, and it's pretty cool. I really liked it. So I'm kind of curious about this game just because the art style looks cool. The soundtrack's good. The premise is interesting. You're this character in this like mechanical suit that looks like an egg, and you have to go around and kind of like save people and save the land in your elemental gimmick gear. It looks pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've heard people like the basic attack the character has is like this little mini punch, and people said that the game is difficult in the beginning just because of the limited range of that little stubby punch that you have to fight with. But later on, you get more abilities and equipment that can help you like defeat the enemies better than just the basic attack. But then I was looking at the gameplay and I was like, yeah, that is a pretty sad little stubby punch that you start with.
Well, I mean, he was apparently like in cryogenesis or something like that for like 100 years, and he just woke up. So let's give him a break. You know, he's got a slow start, but he's going to get going. So
yeah, I would say the art style of the 2D graphics is definitely the most appealing thing about the game to me.
Yeah.
Although I haven't heard the soundtrack yet, so that could also be good.
Yeah.
As Hat was saying. So
yeah, for sure. So yeah, if it comes to Dreamcast Mini, definitely going to play. So players have brought up on the Dreamcast Mini that they think that the 20 games philosophy or product outline, foundation, whatever you want to call it, would be too expensive. You know, just having all these big name games on there, and also the fact that these games are just more modern, right? You can sell these games remastered for like $40 a piece. Whereas the NES Classic, you most likely can't sell those games remastered for $40. So people are pointing out that 20 games would be too expensive for a Dreamcast Mini. The console would be too much money. So people are thinking that perhaps what they might do is release consoles with 5 games on it, and maybe they might have multiple versions with 5 different games on it that you can choose from, but that the console itself would have an online store where you could buy the games that you want for however much money, and it would just download to the console. And effectively, Sega would kind of be back in the console business in a very limited extent, but effectively you could download the games that you want or buy the games that you want and make your own Sega Dreamcast Mini. I think that's awesome, but I don't think Sega would go that far. But what do you guys think?
I think that's a little too ambitious. And how long do you plan on keeping that store up?
Really?
Yeah, I agree. That's server costs and maintenance, right? Just to have a functioning store, and then there's administration costs with making sure that the system is processing everybody's credit card information and everything correctly, and security and everything that goes along with an online store. It may not sound like a lot just because we live in the age of online retail, and everything is just so basic. But if this is if there's it depends on the margin of selling the console, right? Like if it's already like a slim margin, like a slim profit that they're making, that might be too big of a risk to make the console also have Wi-Fi or Ethernet capable, right? So that it can connect to a store and add more games to the system that way. That might just be too much,
Well, the thing being argued here though is that a Dreamcast Mini would cost like $200.
Not
that would
really,
unless you only have like 5 games.
There's a difference between physical value and digital value of a product.
Should tell that to Nintendo.
Back then, yeah, Nintendo. But like for example, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for the longest time was a very rare game, and it was a lot of money. It was going from like $150 to $200 easily to get a copy of that game. And when it came out digitally on PS3 and 360, the price of the physical version dropped tremendously.
Yeah.
So that was because there was no other access to the game. When you create more access to the game, the value will naturally drop down on it. Now, if it does increase back to physical, that may be because there is a very limited I'm sorry, still a very limited stock of it, and people want it for nostalgia reasons. But normally when digital versions of a game come out, the value of the physical drops. So Sega has to look at this product and say, what is the value of it digitally? So if Skies of Arcadia itself, you have to ask yourself, if it was released digitally on something, you would imagine it would be $15 to $20 for the game.
Well, here's the thing. Grandia 2 came out at, I think, $40, and it's currently like 30 on Steam, and it's digital. So obviously it's a remastered version. It has 2 games in it, so that's definitely there for that. And Shenmue 1 and 2 together collectively, that's being sold at a premium. But I see what you're saying, that, okay, Skies of Arcadia, if it's available, the cost of the used version goes down, but there's more money to be made selling these games individually remastered, right? Like Skies of Arcadia, if they remastered that for $25 or $30, they would make more money off that than having to pay licensing fees for a lot of these games, and then, just putting it on this console, selling it for, let's say, $120, and within the first 6 months it gets discounted to $80. It's just, they're not making a ton of money off this thing on the game front. The game front is the biggest cost, I think. And so I think, but
good. Finish what you're saying.
Well, I think that's where people are approaching the online functionality, and I think that people were looking at it as not really solely on this device, right? Like it's something they have to maintain on this little device, and that's it. It would be something maybe on like their own, service that you could do on their website. They would still have the games on Steam, maybe, or some kind of collaboration with that. But this would effectively be a Steam box.
Yeah. Well, for Skies of Arcadia in particular, I think Sega has a eat your cake or have your cake and eat it also scenario. They can put the original Skies of Arcadia, the Dreamcast version, and then they can remaster the GameCube version and sell that as the HD version if they wanted to. They could easily do that. Um, for the Dreamcast Mini in particular, to sell it to an RPG audience, I think that game is the only one you need. But for the console itself to sell, I think really you just need Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, Crazy Taxi, Choo Choo Rocket, Power Stone, either the first one or the second one. Get those on there. I think those 5 titles alone will entice some people to get the Dreamcast. But I do think you do need one major RPG on there, at least one. If you're doing, say, 10 games on it for intrinsic value on it, Skies of Arcadia is the most valuable one that would have to be on there.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to know because for the Sega Genesis Mini, which is obviously way easier, but they put 40 games on that thing. 40, which is more than the SNES Classic, more than the PlayStation Classic. That was a lot. And on top of that, they hired M2 to handle the emulation. And they are like the top of the line for emulation, like quality emulation for their Sega Genesis Mini. So they went above and beyond with the amount of games and the quality of the emulation for that console. So, I mean, it's hard to know. I wouldn't expect 40 games to be on the Mini because the Dreamcast Mini, because that would just be literally a $400 console.
One last thing to remember is these won't be like the HD version. So, like, say Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, there are HD versions of them that you can buy separately. I think they're both $10 each. But they would be emulating the original Dreamcast versions. Like the Sonic Adventure 2 that you buy on PC and modern consoles is the battle version that came out on GameCube. So they're using that version and selling it for $10. I don't know how much value Sonic Adventure 2 would have as a Dreamcast title, but I think the fact that most of the stuff they're going to put on there is probably stuff they own.
Right.
Like they technically own Time Stalkers here.
It's a great game.
It's the RPG. No, it's not. No.
Time has not been kind. The Time Stalkers.
Oh boy, you know nothing. But yeah, so I don't know. I guess it depends on what Sega marks their value as. For all I know, they may be worth next to nothing, and they're just easy enough to port in there. But I'm sorry, I think went off tangent. Don't we have a fifth game?
No, we've covered 5 games. I just want to say that I'm not ruling the online functionality out because it makes no sense that it'll take 2 years for them to get this on there, because I can currently emulate Dreamcast games on an Amazon Fire Stick that costs $40. So it's not like Dreamcast games are like, and when I say emulate, I can run it at 45 to 50 frames per second. Some of the games, some of them kind of drop a little bit. So it's not perfect, but it's definitely playable. So to get the games to run great, it would be, the technology is currently here. It's just, and it's not, storage isn't a concern. These games are like a gigabyte, right? So anyways, I know that.
Let me put it this way too. I can technically make, if I buy a bundle of blank CDs right now, I can make 40 copies of this game and distribute it to everyone I know, and they can all play it on their Dreamcast perfectly. Just have to burn this one game onto my PC and then burn the copy onto another disc. Yeah, that was one of the reasons the Dreamcast didn't do as well as it could have.
Well, someone had to take one for the team. I'm surprised that they did not think ahead about that, because that was something with the PlayStation for a while too. But yeah, let me just say one other thing real quick is regardless of whatever they put on this thing, I'm gonna buy it and I'm gonna hack it. I'm gonna put whatever I want on there. So,
Yeah.
so like we're sitting here debating, like, oh, like, oh, well, doesn't have this. I'll put whatever. Yeah, you know, that's the first game that I would put on there, Time Stalkers, so I can not play it. But yeah, I would just make the best console I could. And maybe that's what they're thinking. Like, people will buy this for nostalgic value, and then people, you know, they don't have to pay the licensing fees, and people will put whatever they want on there anyways.
Yeah. So they think like the people who really want to play Record of Lodoss War, right, or Elemental Gimmick Gear, they'll find a way after we just put out the console. We just need to get them to buy it first, right?
Right.
So if it's anything like the PlayStation one, let it come out, let it fail, because they decided to pick the games that no one wanted.
Yeah.
And let it drop to like $20-$30, buy it, ultimate emulation machine.
It's got like it's like main title it has on it is Phantasy Star Offline. It's just like the online game but offline. And yeah. I don't know. That would suck. But dude, the reason I'm kind of excited about it though for the hacking purpose is because the PlayStation Classic, it was the most powerful of the mini consoles. And when you hacked it, I was able to play DS games and I was able to play, you know, PSP games on there fairly well. And I would imagine the Dreamcast Mini would be even more powerful. So I would be excited for that reason to be able to hack that and have even greater capability, or just to play those games a little bit better. So the holy grail is to have something that emulates PS2 that's that portable, right? Because right now I'm restricted to my PC, which isn't exactly something I can just carry around the house, you know? So,
question for you all.
What's that?
What do you think they would do with VMUs? Some games use VMU like features.
They'll just be unavailable. I don't think they'll even bother.
I'm trying to think if there's any game where needing the VMU screen was mandatory. I can't think of one. Skies of Arcadia certainly was not one.
No, I think they were all just like little used for filler content, right? Like for optional stuff that you could additions to the game.
You think they'll put like Seaman on there?
Seaman, well, no, just because you need special peripherals for it.
That's what I'm saying, but it's like an icon. I hate to say iconic, but it's like I remember the commercial for that. It was stupid, but
I mean, Luigi Boy narrates that game. It's epic, but just because of special peripherals, I don't think so. But it would be very delightful if that did somehow make it on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, the VMUs, I can't think of a single game that you had the mandatory. I knew Sonic Adventure 1, you could put your chows in it. I guess if you have Sonic Adventure 1 on there, either you would need to make like a virtual VMU, which I doubt they'll do. I think they would just disable the feature, I guess.
They're probably going to make this as cheap as possible. That's what I'm thinking. Like, I don't think they're going to really do anything crazy with it, because these games are already going to, like, put these many games on there, like games like we said you could sell for actual money. And the fact that it's going to be more advanced hardware than the Sega Genesis Mini. And the Sega Genesis Mini was like $80 or $90 at launch. So they're going to try to cut costs somewhere. I don't think they're going to put those added features on there.
Yeah, if they put a VMU emulator in, that would be an emulator within an emulator, and that costs money to make. And I don't think they'll go out of the way for the VMUs just so you can play with your chow outside of Sonic Adventure, even though the emulation would be on the side. I don't know.
Well, if it has an emulator within an emulator, Eric, can we get this on record? You will buy it day one.
No.
Oh, come on.
Not see I already own a lot of these games?
Well, that's the other thing. I was like, that's the reason why I never bought the Sega Genesis Mini, despite the emulation being amazing. Like I own all these games in like so many different ways that I was just like, I just never got around to it. But anyways, I'm surprised our video has not cut off. We're recording with something that has optional. We're experimenting with something where it has optional amounts of time, and it was supposed to be cut off at an hour, and we're gonna have to start a new call, but it's still going. So I say we just plow ahead and push
We'll
this
keep going.
baby to its limits. But yeah. So
Yeah,
anyway, what's that, Eric? You kind of faded out there.
right, it'll cut off right when you say that.
Well, it's still recording, so we're rocking and rolling. I'm happy. Yeah. So let's keep going though. I mean, I think we kind of hit the Dreamcast Mini there pretty good. So on a separate topic, we're gonna move into Nintendo here, where we have Nintendo 3DS and DS games or RPGs. Now, like I said before, the prices of these games are starting to go up because 3DS has officially been discontinued. As far as I know, you can't even access the store anymore. So you're not able to buy these games digitally. As far as I know, somebody can fact check me on that. But that's what I was reading online, that the store is not up anymore either. So the price of games naturally are starting to go up, especially in the situation we're in, where people are not going out as often anymore and they're getting into new hobbies. You know, people that still have a job, of course. And so you're starting to see the price of games on eBay and Amazon and other places start to skyrocket. And if you look up games like Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest VIII, Dragon Quest V, mostly a lot of Square Enix RPGs on the 3DS and DS, a lot of them are like well over $60. Some of them are hitting like $100, and it's crazy. I have to think that that's going to come down soon before it goes back up. But regardless, the prices of these games are officially going to be going up in the near future, I would presume, now that they are no longer being supported digitally. So with that said, we went out and searched for RPGs you could still find on either the 3DS or DS that were still cheap. So cheap to us is $20 or under. And we each found a specific RPG that you can buy right now for under $20, used, of course, in some cases. And we'll talk about it. And then afterwards, we're going to decide who found the best deal. So I guess I can go ahead and start us off here because I'm already talking here. But the game that I found was Final Fantasy IV on the DS for $18.99. Now that is a deal if I've never heard of one. Now, the reason I prefer it on the 3D or the DS as opposed to the PC version is the PC version that apparently has had some issues at launch. It had some cutscenes that were kind of cut out. Some of the dialogue was stripped out of the bottom, and it apparently wasn't a very good port. I don't know if they fixed it since then, but that kind of turned me off initially on the release. And then also, I like the DS version because it's portable, right? I don't like being strapped to my PC. I did play the game on my phone. The phone version's worth playing. However, I don't like using the touchpad. I hate that crap. My 3DS is way better.
Just to add to that, the mobile version, the updates through the years have not been as much. So you don't get like a nice full screen of it on your modern phones because it was made for your earlier time, and it crashes a lot. That's why I haven't played it anymore on that version, just because if you like put your phone to sleep or you switch to another app, there is a decent chance that it will crash.
Yeah.
Now, granted, you have the continue button, but it puts you like back to the start of the area you're in,
which is kind of a downer, but for some people that's the only option for sure. But for $18.99, you can own it on your portable DS or 3DS. And guys, this version of Final Fantasy IV is my absolute favorite. It's the 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV, and it's got voice acting, it's got music that's been remastered, it's got a rewritten dialogue, and it is just fantastic. On top of that, they've added little slight touches to it where characters, while they're traveling through dungeons and stuff, you can see what they're thinking, which you're not going to get like huge new story arcs, but it does help flesh some of the characters out and make some of the relationships feel a little bit more immersive, which I think really adds a lot to the game. So highly recommend it for that reason. And in the 3D version, guys, playing it like that, it really feels like a PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy game. And it's just a classic RPG remade. And I think that's my final point with this game that I want to bring up is that a lot of times when Square remakes an RPG, a classic RPG, they ruin it. They did that with Final Fantasy VI, where they did Microsoft Paint. People are mixed opinions about the 7 remake. Some people really loved it. Some people felt like it was a completely new experience, a separate game. And I think that Final Fantasy IV remade in this fashion, one of the few times where they remade it, and I feel like they didn't jack it up. Like it's still a great version of the game, and that's shocking. But I'll point out that Square hired a third-party company to make this. Square didn't make it in-house. Yeah. So yeah, that's important to bring up. And it pains me to know that they apparently were contracted to make Final Fantasy V, I believe, and instead they made After Years by Square's direction. So.
Well, I will say you're absolutely right. I think it is the definitive version of FF4. It's an absolute phenomenal game. What just to add on to what you said, so this is like an ideal remake. It takes what was great about the original and they find ways to modernize it. Because if you play the original FF4, it is outdated in a lot of ways that may be unappealing to newer audience. But this version, while it does look polygonal a little bit, yes, the character designs and the art direction are still so great that you kind of forgive that a little bit. Like, there's so many good things about it to say. Like, if I have to play FF4 every time, it is absolutely that version.
Yeah, hands down.
I do really like the PSP version. If you're a big fan of the Super Nintendo version, the PSP version is a good HD remaster of that. But if you want a nice remake experience of 4, like, they hit the nail on this one. They've kept the spirit of what made FF4 great. It's basically like they retold it, but didn't take away the meat of FF4. Like, I know there's a lot of controversy with 7. Like, they felt like they changed it too much to go into a different direction. But if you're looking for like a more genuine modern like experience of 4, the DS slash, I don't know, PC slash mobile version is definitely the way to go. But the DS version is definitely the most stable.
Yeah, for sure. Let me also add that the Super Nintendo version, in my opinion, is one of the worst ways to play the game. In my opinion, like that is not a good version to play, at least in English. It's much easier. The random encounters at certain points are actually just obnoxiously every 2 steps random encounter. The enemies are easy. I mean, these remastered versions, this version on the DS is better in every way. The gameplay is better optimized. The story's more tightly written, and it's just perfect. So
I'm trying to remember. I know the Japanese version only had their normal mode, which is our hard mode.
Right.
Did we get an option of easy or hard mode in the DS version? I know you get them in the later ports, but I don't know if the DS version is the Japanese difficulty or not.
I don't know if it's because it's a complete remake. I don't know if they took the specifics from the Japanese Super Nintendo version and applied that, or if they just rebounced it on their own. I don't know. I know it's harder than our version for sure. So
yeah, I remember it being very hard on the DS.
Yeah. Well, that's not a bad thing. So
no, not so hard that it's like hair ripping, but it's obviously more challenging than like the Super Nintendo version we got.
Yeah, for sure. Eric, what do you got? What game did you find?
This you can find on Amazon between $15 to $20 used. Or you can dish out the $6 more for $26 if you really want to and buy a new version of it. And that is the original Radiant Historia for the DS. Now, I know what you're saying is, well, they made a 3DS version of it. They didn't made a remastered version of it. While yes, they did, it is also very expensive because, like had said, after the 3DS got um, announced that it's stopping production, that was one of the games that increased in price, especially if you want the full box version that they offered. So that may be a very expensive endeavor. Um, and it is worth getting that version. But if it's too much for your wallet, this version is perfectly fine. Um, a lot of people argue the art style in the original is better than the remasters.
Because
I
it
know that
is. It is.
there's a big debate. I mean, I'm more on the side of the original, but I'm fine with the new one too. But if you had to put a gun to my head, I would pick the original art style. But it does have a very unique style to it, definitely, of course. Um, but the game itself is so ridiculously good. I have not played an RPG this fantastic that generation. Like, I don't know what to say. It blew my mind away. I thought this was something I wouldn't like, constantly having to go back and forth in time between two alternative timelines. But it was so well made, well paced. Like I couldn't help but just go straight to the end, like nonstop. Like I did not feel like putting down my DS at all when I first played it. And basically, how the game works is your main character is gets this ability to go back in time and change things, bad things that happen during his adventure. And during that, he actually splits the timeline when he makes two critical decisions at the beginning of the game. So while you're going through the adventure, you're going in between two of those timelines where you chose to be part of the army and chose to not be part of the army. Um, so you're going through two different timelines to fix like the time ripple and everything throughout the game, and it all comes to this one big clash at the end of the game. This is such a creative way to tell a story and something that could really only be done very well in a video game. And like I said, I just can't recommend it enough. The battle system may be a little basic, but there is strategy to it. There is a lot of fun to it. Like I said, for the price it is worth, like you will be engaged for a very long time with it and enjoy every aspect of it. I guarantee it.
Yeah, it's really just a classic RPG in the Super Nintendo vein. Obviously, it's been modernized quite a bit um, with just quality of life adjustments for the modern times, of course. But I mean, this is really an RPG for the past that's really in that vein, and it is excellent. It's really good. And guys, that new version, I don't like that art style. To get the old art style, you have to pay what, like $2 or $3 for DLC to get the old art back in. And now the store's closed, so that's not even an option as far as I'm aware. So you're stuck with that new art with the new version, and the new version's like $40. So I think for $16, that game is just a steal. And I easily think that game is going to skyrocket in price in 5 years from now. I don't think it's going to be $16. I think it's going to be more than that.
Oh, not to mention soundtrack, Yoko Shimomura, lady who did
She's okay.
Kingdom Hearts
Yeah,
series,
she's
Final
okay.
Fantasy 15, Super
Yeah.
Mario RPG.
I have heard better.
Mhm.
No, I'm just kidding. It's amazing. It's really good.
It's phenomenal. Like you first hear it and it's catchy and puts you right into the it immerses you or immediately, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I actually bought this deal recently on Amazon. Like Eric, you kind of posted on our Discord that you were going to pick this. I was like, damn, I just bought it. Because I was like, that's a good deal, because I've only ever emulated it. I never played it on the DS. I thought for sure that it cost more. So that was a good pick for sure. Stan, what do you got over there? What's your mystery RPG?
All right, so I took a little bit of a different angle. I chose Mario and Luigi Dream Team for 3DS. Now
There you go.
the Mario and Luigi games are solid. I don't think they're as well received among JRPG enthusiasts as FF4 and um, Radiant Historia.
Yeah, I think you
However,
lost.
well,
Just
before-
keep going.
let me make my argument to the jury
make
here
your-
before you.
Make your case.
I gotta make my case.
That's a
So
long uphill battle.
there was a copy on Amazon that I found for $16.99,
Okay.
and that was new when I looked on Friday.
Okay.
It's now Monday, and it's no longer there for that price. Now the cheapest you can get a new version of the game is $22,
Okay.
and you can get a used version for around $15. But it was $16.99 new, and so I thought that would help out my case. But that's no longer there. So that
I was
kind
gonna
of
say, I was like, how's this helping you out? You made it more expensive.
well, I just wanted to point that out because that's originally a big reason why I picked it. But it just goes to Hat's point that, like we were saying earlier, like if you're trying to get these 3DS games, like now is the time, because like in just a few days, like the price of this game for a new version jumped up like about $5, right? So if you're looking to save money, you want to be looking for these games sooner rather than later if you're trying to fill out your collection.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But another reason I picked it is the company that made these games, Alpha Dream, is no longer around. It closed down. So and it's owned by Nintendo, right? So they can re-release it on whatever if they wanted to. However, they take advantage of the DS like dual screen nature of the game, like the presentation and like some of the little mini games that you do. So if you don't have a 3DS version, you're kind of losing out on how the game was originally created, assuming they don't. I have no idea what Nintendo's going to do, right? They may have another dedicated portable machine that has 2 screens, and can play old 3DS games, but you never know.
Might
Right?
have
They may
3 screens.
right. So it's got kind of that unique aspect with the dual screens, whereas FF4 and Radiant Historia, I think you can in the future, like there's a Steam version of FF4, right? So it's a perfect example. Like it is possible to play that game without the dual screens that you have on the DS. So
and on the cell phone too. So
yeah. Whereas with the Mario and Luigi games, I think you lose something if you don't have that dual screen aspect to them.
So you're saying that this version is distinctly unique to the portable system itself, that it could be re-released, but you wouldn't get the same experience.
It would be different, yeah. And I think that's something Nintendo, like, especially for anything that's going to be like a Mario or a Zelda, like they kind of, like you see it with the Wii and with the Switch, like they really want to take advantage of the hardware that's in there, like whatever features the hardware has. A lot of times they take advantage of it, or they use it with some kind of gimmick or in there.
That's a fair point.
I will say the Wii U Virtual Console store did have DS games.
Yeah,
but that's closed down too, right?
No, you can still buy from the Wii U store.
It's still up.
Is it? I could have swore it was.
Yeah.
Well, I
think
I
the
can't
3DS
look it up
store
right
is
now
even
because
up
I'm
too.
recording this, but
The Wii store is gone, but the Wii U is
Okay.
still up.
so there
I
we go.
will still say it's not the ideal way to play the game.
Oh, you don't
Like
think
if
so?
you have no other on the Wii U version,
Oh,
yeah, looking at a big screen to a small screen or using that big pad to around. I don't think the Switch would do a 3DS emulator or a DS emulator,
mhm.
just because the nature of the console way it is. So you're right. It will be a little hard to preserve this version.
Mhm.
So I don't know what they'll do with those
Yeah,
3DS specific games in the future. There are some games you can easily convert and just take away the touch features and just integrate them into the game itself with button map them or whatnot. But that one's going to be Dream Team will be a hard one.
Yeah.
Because they have a very specific, unique touch features to it. So unless they give you like a pointer or something, or let you use a Joy-Con to be a touch instead. But even then, you would have to switch between 2 screens It just won't be the ideal version, I think.
Yeah. So that's what I'm planting my flag on. I'm staking my case on. You need this version of the game, and you can get it for used. You can get it under $20, new, just a little bit over $20.
Well, I would argue that, you know, you can play Pac-Man on the console, but it's just really not the same without playing it in the arcade. You know, it's just you're really losing something by playing it on the console.
I
You can
mean,
buy a
Have you
joystick.
bought the most recent Pac-Man?
no.
No, I'm just kidding.
I mean,
no,
do you
that's-
have to use a Joy-Con pointer to make Pac-Man move left and right and touch him and make him move? No. You can still play Pac-Man with a controller and a joystick like it originally is meant to.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have that like one-on-one, almost like James Bond type thing where you're like staring at the other person, right? Because you can do the like 2-on-2 or 1v1 combat mode, which is
Oh, the
pretty
pizza
cool.
parlor version.
Yeah,
Tabletop.
come on, man. It's great. You put your beer down on it, and it's fantastic. Anyways, getting off track. So, okay, we have Stan making the case of, hey, this isn't, you know, it's not a bad game, but it's not an exceptional game, but it does have a unique functionality on the 3DS, and the price of the game is currently going up. So you can get it used for what, $16? You said roughly
Around 15, yeah.
okay, now he's dropping it to 15. So I'm just kidding. Okay, 15. So he's saying $15. So decent game, unique functionality, $15 used, but is going up. Then we have Radiant Historia used is about $18, right? Or 16.
Yeah. The 3DS version is just way too expensive right now.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that with the success of the PC version of games, I really think there may be a Switch / PC version coming in the future
So
of that game.
potentially a I would agree with that. Potentially a remaster coming to the Switch, but you can get the used version for about $16 right now. Radiant Historia, classic RPG, hits lots of people's favorites on the portable system. Then we have Final Fantasy IV DS, $18. Classic game, remade, 3D graphics, great dialogue, great, just all around remake. What are we putting here for the best deal that we found? I'm gonna have to go with, I think, Radiant Historia. I think that is just a standout deal. I think that game is one of those games that's going to be difficult to, I don't want to say difficult to find, but that's just a game that people remember playing, right? And they're going to want that version. I mean, they've re-released Chrono Trigger on multiple platforms, and people still pay an ass amount of money to play it on the Super Nintendo.
Speaking of Chrono Trigger, that was going to be my original choice. Then I went on Amazon and looked at it. I remember it was not even 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I bought this for a friend of mine for his birthday.
Yeah.
It was $20 for a new copy, brand new sealed copy. Now to get that sealed copy, I don't think you see the phone. No. It is now $68.90 to buy it.
Yeah, and that's crazy. That's obnoxious. It's gone up $50, and
yeah.
The fact that they're not making the game anymore on the DS is only going to make it go up even more. So, but anyways, I'm putting my money on Radiant Historia. I think that's the best deal. I think Stan makes a compelling case with his, constantly swinging back and forth price ranges, and I'm just giving him a hard time.
Unique functionality.
Right? Unique functionality is also very compelling. Eric,
if you want an experience you can't get elsewhere, then that is definitely one. You can easily, I'm not saying you should emulate anything, but I'm just saying emulating the games that me and Hat talked about is very easy to do and plays just as well. Emulator or not emulated, if you try to emulate Mario and Luigi on the 3DS, you're not going to have as fun as the time. You're going to tell yourself, I'd rather be playing it on the original device than that. So I definitely agree with Stan on that perspective.
Okay, so which game are you picking for the best deal? that we found.
Oh, mine, of course. But I'm just saying, I understand.
You're just being a
from.
gentleman. Like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would, if we're just going by the quality of the game, then I would probably. I'm torn because I really love FF4, and that's a great version of the game, and the portability of it is nice, but it's also available on PC. So for the quality and the accessibility of it, I guess Radiant Historia is probably the better of the two. So,
Oh. So you didn't
better
find
deal. Better deal, I mean.
You didn't find your own case that compelling then?
I mean, I still think it's a
it's a good deal. I think all three of these are great deals.
They're good deals, all of them, yeah.
For $60, you can have some three great games that may be much more money in the future. So this is an investment.
Yeah.
Anyways, we got one Discord question, and then we're gonna wrap this thing up. So, real quick, let me just talk about our I almost said Mario Party, our media partner, RPGFan.com. We've been media partners with them for a little bit over a year now. It's been great. But if you don't know about them, they have a great RPG website. It's rpgfan.com. They have regular RPG news on there, game reviews, soundtrack reviews, other RPG podcasts. They have Random Encounter, which does news similar to us and other discussions. Retro Encounter does more review-styled podcast episodes where they go deep dives into particular RPGs every month. And then they also have Rhythm Encounter, which is a RPG music-based podcast, which is really cool. And then we're also featured on there as well. And they also have a YouTube page where they're starting to do more video reviews. And I get the blessing of being able to play some of these games and record the footage for them. And it's been a blast on that front. But latest review out is Paper Mario, the Origami King. And it's also got a video review. I recorded the footage for that, actually. But 8.5 out of 10. So a pretty good score. And yeah, definitely go check them out. We were kind of bringing up some of the reviews before with the Dreamcast. So that kind of tells you how long they've been at this. They have reviews going back to, I believe, 1998. So I always like going on there and kind of reading some of the older reviews. Also, a lot of times you can get multiple view angles, like with Skies of Arcadia, 5 different people reviewed that game. So, I mean, that's if you want to read multiple reviews of the same game, but kind of different viewpoints. It's interesting to get that as well, going back in time. So definitely go check them out. And if this is your first time checking us out, we do game-specific discussions. So just a quick lineup of some of the game discussions that we have done. We did a multi-part series on the 7 Remake. We did Crisis Core. We did the Final Fantasy 7 Original and Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 13. So a lot of Final Fantasy content. Xenoblade Chronicles, Dragon Quest XI, Dragon Quest V, Kingdom Hearts 3, Knights of the Old Republic, and Chrono Trigger. And our next game that we will be talking about is Super Mario RPG. I put some time into that this weekend, making some good progress, I think. I just got through the tower part with the...
Booster's Tower.
Yes. Yeah, I just got through that. So that gives you an idea of where I'm at with the game. I think
you're exactly at the halfway point.
Yeah. So I'm making some headway. It's a good game. I'm enjoying it. And so look forward to that. Anyways, let's move on to our community question. If you want to ask your own question, there'll be a link in the description to join our Discord server. And on there, you will be able to ask the question. And we go through these. Usually we try to do one per episode, depending on time. So this week we have from Berserker Barrage, who says, for any RPGs you ultimately didn't finish, is there a reason or factors that typically cause you to drop off and not return? Maybe it's too long or repetitive, has a poor story, etc. Is there a certain weakness in a game that causes drop off for most people, or can a game compensate for its weakness by showing one extremely great element and overshadows its other shortcomings? Berserker Barrage is able to ask 4 questions in one, but we're going to do it here. So
they're all related.
Yeah, they're all intertwined, but an RPG you just couldn't finish. Why couldn't you finish it? And basically, can a game compensate for its weaknesses? That type of thing. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
I think
Are,
that,
are we just going to assume that the game is good, and we're going to explain why we dropped out of it? Because we can all say why we dropped out of a bad game.
yeah, I mean, I can just say that
It
in general,
sucked.
it's if a game exceeds 40 hours, I start to get fatigued, and it
Mhm.
has to be really good for me to stick with it after that, or else I'll just put it down. And I have no quarrels about not finishing a game if I get tired of it, because I'm only going to be alive for a certain amount of time, and I'm not going to sit 50 hours into something I don't like. So sorry, unless we're talking about it for the podcast, that's it. So
Uh, I guess for me, I mean, there's multiple different reasons that something could
yeah,
happen. Like a new game came out, and I just didn't finish this one in time, and it just kind of went to the back end, and I kind of forgot about it. Or there's like a certain point of game, like you said, like I can think of Tales of Symphonia specifically. Like I got the PS3 remastered version of that game, and I was enjoying playing it through the whole way till it got to the point where you constantly had to be backtracking to the previous dungeons. You went in the game and it makes you go there multiple times. And I asked myself, I don't remember this part, and it is bugging me to no end, to the point that I'm frustrated with it, and I don't want to go through it. So I stopped playing it.
yeah,
I just put it away. I was like, I'm done with this. I've done it before. I don't need to do it again. But I guess there are just points in RPGs um where it may become stagnated for me, or I really feel like playing another game and I'm trying to justify in my head, and I eventually do justify it in my head. I'm like, man, I really rather play an action adventure game right now. Like I have too much adrenaline to just relax and play an RPG. So, like I said, it's various reasons
what you brought
that
up
we're all
with
human.
Yeah, what you brought up with Tales of Symphonia is my relationship with Final Fantasy VIII. I've already beaten it before,
Mm.
and I really, really enjoy playing the first disc. And every time I get past the first disc on replays, I get really fatigued really quickly, and I just end up wanting to play something else. But that first disc is just dynamite. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're replaying an RPG, you know when there is a boring part of the game, and you ask yourself, is it worth putting that energy in to get past that boring part I don't like to get back to the really good part I like? Because I know
Mhm.
like certain games, like especially like multi-disc games, usually like disc two or something is kind of like more of the mellow down part of the game, and you're wanting to get to that big exciting moment from disc three that you're really looking forward to. And I'm counting of Legend of Dragoon in my head.
That's the one
But
I was gonna say.
yeah, as an example. But yeah, I like there's examples like that too.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Legend of Dragoon is one that came to mind for me when looking at this question, and it's, I guess if I had to, give a specific answer to the question, it's if the story and the gameplay, like, have a lull or just kind of lose their appeal at a certain point in the game for me. Um, in Legend of Dragoon, this happens in disc 2 because in the first disc, you're kinda uncovering the story. There's, like, a civil war going on. It's kinda interesting. You're getting your characters are learning their dragoon abilities, right? They're getting their dragoon powers. In disc 2, you go to a neighboring kingdom. They have their own issues you're trying to work through, but your characters, for the most part, have their powers at that point. The gameplay progression is kind of like, kinda on autopilot, I guess. Like, you're not getting as many additions or stuff like that. So, like, the game really slows down both in story and gameplay. And when I replay that game, I typically play the first disc, and then I get tired of it. I get bored of it due to the gameplay and the story kind of
That's
having a big lull. But it picks up again, like, pretty well in disc 3. So it's
that's
kind of a shame, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of those games where when people say like it's their favorite RPG of all time, kind of like, have you played that game recently? like it's great, but it does have that kind of drop off point where it's kind of like, God,
Yeah.
this is kind of a sludge here for a while until it picks back up again. But
Yeah, I think the first disc for the most part is pretty solid. It's just the second one is meh.
Yeah.
It could be half as long and be a better game.
Yeah. So the only other example, like I could think of a few, but just for brevity's sake, the only other example I could think I want to bring up here is on the gameplay front. I think that really matters with a game like Final Fantasy 13, where I like games that really optimize creativity and like have multiple ways of combating the same enemy. And with games like Final Fantasy 13, where there's a lot of strategic complexity in the gameplay, but it's a single strategy every time, which is to stagger the enemy. And it's like one strategy every single time to win the battle. I just like doing that for 45 hours just gets mind numbing to me. Whereas some people just really like that, just like, this is what you do. And I'm really good at doing that thing. And where I'm going to keep doing that thing really well. I like just like total, like creative control over it. That's why I liked Final Fantasy 12, the original, with like the Gambit setup, because I could just make all my characters different classes, whatever I wanted. I could change their gambits up. I could do whatever the hell I wanted with how to approach games. That's why I like games with like, you can either approach like Ghost of Tsushima. I'm just bringing up most recently. A lot of games do this where you can go in and just kind of strategically, go in there and just attack it from that front, or you can just go in there guns blazing or swords blazing, I guess, and just really take the whole camp on. I mean, I like multiple approaches to enemies, and like, it's just, the gameplay just feels dry. I just don't like it, and it'll grow on me to be fatiguing. So
Yeah.
I will say another one is say that there's a really difficult boss and you need to grind a lot of levels or do a lot of grinding in general to progress past a certain point. That can be a real big turnoff, especially if you've already played the game before. You're like, oh man, I forgot about this part. I don't want to go through all this crap again just to
grind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's happened a couple times.
For sure. I mean, like, if a game's really well built, you can approach it from different ways and take down those bosses, easily with the correct approach. Because even a game like Final Fantasy X, you can beat that game without even using the sphere grid. If you optimize the items well enough, right?
Yeah.
And some people look at that as like a loophole, and I'm like, dude, you know how much effort you have to put in to do that? And like the amount of strategy and just how well you have to know that game and what types of enemies to search for. And it's like a completely different way to approach the game. And the fact that works and you can play it like that is so awesome. And it's just goes to the creative control they let you have over the gameplay. So
yeah, that's an expert level understanding of that game to pull that off.
Yeah.
Like no one playing for the first time would be
no.
able to do that.
No. Well, no. Let's just go.
Not really. Yeah.
I mean, maybe if you followed a guide online or something, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point about Final Fantasy 13, especially like in the first, I don't know, 30 hours of the game. It's very much like each boss fight that you encounter is like, make sure you know how to use the Sentinel role, right, in this boss encounter, because he's going to do a big attack about midway through that'll just wipe your whole party.
Right.
So you have to do that in order to win, essentially, or win with any kind of effectiveness. Right. And it makes it very obvious with like a prompt in the beginning, like, have you tried the Sentinel role? Or in this battle, you have to use the medic role. So it is very much like, how well can you complete the task that's like in front of you, like optimally, I guess.
Right.
But you can't really branch out with different strategies. There's like one path to victory, and it's about how well can you complete that versus giving you that creativity, like you said, of multiple strategies. Yeah. It's not until the end game content that you actually get to that point. Well, and that's why people say you have to play for 50 hours until it gets good, because that experience, that RPG experience that people like, where you're able to, customize your characters the way you want, really isn't available in the game until the end. So
isn't that the story with every RPG though? Oh, it's the post game content. It's the post game
Supposedly.
content that it's the end of the game. That's when it gets good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what, anyways. So those are some reasons. In general, can we overcome that? I would say, yeah. I mean, it depends on where it's varied, right? How bad the weaknesses are versus how high the strengths are. Dragon Quest XI on the PlayStation, it was obscenely long, which was a weakness in my eyes. And also, the orchestral soundtrack does sound better than the MIDI soundtrack. However, I felt like the pros on the PlayStation 4 far outweighed those cons, and I was easily able to stick with it. Or Xenoblade Chronicles had really gruesome dungeons, terrible inventory management, in my opinion, and I was able to stick with terrible side quest design. They fixed it a lot better with the remaster, but still, a lot of issues, but I was able to stick with it because I really liked the story and a great soundtrack and great world. So it really, depends how that's balanced. So I think you can overcome it. It's just,
For me,
I think for something like oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, like on the flip side of that, like Hat was saying, it depends. I can get through Xenoblade Chronicles and have a great time because the setting and the story and the moment to moment gameplay is really great. It gets bogged down with the side quests and the inventory management. But then another one that I couldn't finish was I Am Setsuna, which is a short
come
game.
on. I love that game.
Well, I just couldn't finish it. I wasn't into it, but like that's a short game. But I found the gameplay boring and none of the characters really hooked me. Like there wasn't a single character that I was like, I like this character. Like I want to see how it finishes for them. Like where they go.
Yeah.
And the setting is also very not a lot of variety to it, right? It's like a lot of snow, a lot of dreary landscape, which fits with the story they're going for. But yeah, so it depends. For me, that was just one that I couldn't finish. So, but I know other people like that game. So
if you play the game to the end, and then I'm gonna pull a stand here, and then you get the bonus ending,
it gets good.
It completes it full circle, and you're like, yeah, that was a good game. But I only paid like $20 for it, so
yeah.
I would say on my end, check your backlog is one thing. If you're kind of like, I guess if you're an RPG fanatic, you're always dealing with that many hours anyways. But if you're someone who's in a variety of things like I am, a lot of the games I play are like 15 to 20 hour fair action adventure games. And then I tell myself like, okay, there's not many action adventure games I feel like playing. Why don't I just find a good RPG to sit down, relax, and play? Like, if you feel like you have a backlog of these several games, you feel like you're taking up too much time on one game when you could be dishing through the others, something like that. So maybe if it's like a much longer RPG, like a Tales game, for instance, maybe just kind of make sure everything's set to the side and you just, have the time in the world for it right at the moment.
Yeah. Agreed.
That's one thing also.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. So, nutshell, yes, you can compensate in multiple ways. And just depends on how well the game is balanced. If its heights exceed the weaknesses, or like Eric said, you can just play something else, and that's fine too. So I think that's going to wrap us up for this week. That's all we got for our topics. Again, if you would like to leave a question, there'll be a link in the description for you to join our Discord server, and you can ask a question on there. We really appreciate that. But other than that, we will see you all next week. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
See you next time.